Welcome to Highly Sensitive, Happily Married, the podcast that teaches you to not only have an easier marriage as a sensitive woman, but to have one that feels more amazing by the day. Where you'll hear relatable stories, love advice that works, and coaching on how to have a marriage where feeling upset and disconnected is a thing of the past, and where instead a sense of loving connection and even fun and lightness is the norm. I'm Hannah Brooks, highly sensitive person, love expert, and marriage coach, and I'm so happy to be on this journey with you. Hey, my friend. How are you? I am doing pretty well. I'm just kind of loving the really cool fall-like day we're having. There's something about it that feels so settling and grounding to me today. So I'm really enjoying that. And I have to say I'm getting super excited for Treasured to begin. If you haven't heard about it or you haven't taken a look at it or considered joining, you really might want to. The doors close on Saturday to join. We are getting started. Our first call is October 7th, but we're already getting going because I have a whole learning site, a whole module that anyone who joins gets well before we actually start. So you can start making momentum right away. And this module really sets you up to make the most of our entire time together. So if you're considering at all, if you want your marriage to be better, I highly recommend checking it out and joining now. If you're listening to this podcast the day it came out, you have like 3 more days to join, as doors will close on Saturday the 30th at midnight Pacific Coast time. So Pacific Coast US time, doors close. So don't miss it. It's going to be such an amazing time. Fun, totally transformative. Might be some tears, but they're going to be the good ones that are going to move you forward. And I promise there's going to be laughter and deep experiences of connection with each other as you all bring that out into your marriages more and more and more over our time together. I just can't wait. I can't wait for you to go through the process. So the link to learn more and join is in the show notes, or you can just go right over to my website, www.lifeisworthloving.com. You'll see on the menu a place where it says Coach with Me, Treasured. Click that. It'll give you everything you need to learn about it and make the decision about joining. Okay, with no further ado, let's talk about conflict aversion and how to create more comfort with this conflict part of marriage. Now, if you caught the episode 94, we're kind of circling back to some of that. That was called 4 Keys to Conflict Proofing Your Marriage. That's such a good episode. You don't have to listen to that first. There might be a tiny bit of overlap, because I did mention in that episode this thing called conflict aversion. Now, conflict aversion is really normal for us as highly sensitive people. And of course, what I mean by aversion is we just don't like it. We want to avoid it. We want to not have to experience it. Yeah? And of course, this is because so many of us as highly sensitive people are quite uncomfortable with it. And it makes so much sense. So if you're really uncomfortable with conflict, if it's really kind of triggering for you, that makes sense. Conflict generally doesn't feel great, right? It's not something most of us like really enjoy, although I hear there are people. But as highly sensitive people, our emotions are strong and big and deep, right? So I get it. I get why we can be conflict averse. I get why you don't like it. It's not something I look forward to either. Although I do look forward to a good, difficult conversation. And there is a sort of distinction there, which I probably won't get into today, but right? Conflict, difficult conversation, we don't have to group them into the exact same category. But, right, even though I don't like conflict, you don't like conflict, like don't enjoy the experience of it, it's important to understand that we can make conflict so much worse in our marriages when we are averse to them, right? When we are scared of them, when we let them become this thing that we absolutely need to avoid, or that we do our very best to never come close to. Yeah? Because think about it. If you're scared of conflict, then when it eventually, inevitably does happen, it's that much worse, right? Because not only do you have the conflict and the normal discomfort of it, but then you have the fear on top of it, that extra emotion. You know that feeling that's like can get really strong, like, oh no, this is happening, right? So this elevated emotion, right? So we have the discomfort and then this super elevated emotion on top of it. And this can make for a very exaggerated experience of the conflict, right? And a very exaggerated emotionally, right? Emotionally exaggerated? Yeah, that's how I want to say it. And, right, so even bigger emotions, even more huge emotions, and much likely a harder time navigating the conflict, right? Because you've ever heard me say, when emotions are strong, intelligence is low. So, that means you're going to have a harder time actually getting through the conflict, resolving the conflict, and letting it lead anywhere good, right? There'll be less understanding. There'll be more reactivity. And ultimately, most likely, bigger blow-ups than necessary. Or another thing that can happen if you're really averse to it or scared of it is, and this may be more your style of conflict aversion, is that you avoid it entirely, which means you avoid any difficult conversation because it has potential to become a conflict, right? And then all sorts of things that need to be brought into the open can't be. All sorts of issues ensue, right? Like you'll have lots of unmet desires. You'll have things that you really want in your relationship that you aren't articulating, you aren't asking for. You'll have all sorts of things about you that your partner doesn't even know because you haven't brought it to him, right? He can't fully know you when we're avoiding these things, right? And resentments will be kind of like festering always under the surface of things. And it sets the stage for you not feeling seen or even really cared for, right? Because again, you're not communicating, you're not sharing, you're just kind of avoiding as much as possible conflict. And so you're keeping to yourself in a way. You're keeping parts of you to yourself. The parts of you that might bring hard stuff up but that are nonetheless so important for you to be loved for fully, right? Loved and seen for who you fully are. And I could go on here. But another thing that can happen here is those giant blow-ups anyway, right? Happen eventually. Because it's kind of like that metaphor that's used often about like when we stuff our emotions, when we stuff what's going on for us, when we try to hide from difficult things in our relationship. It's like a bottle, right? That we have the bottle cap on and like it's being kind of shaken up slowly in the background. And all of a sudden there's so much pressure in there that the cap finally blows, right? So all of this can also come from conflict aversion. Whereas when you have a decent measure of peace, or what we might call comfort with conflict, and let me be clear, I'm not saying you need to like it or right? Enjoy it, right? Just accept it as an appropriate part of relationships when you have peace with it like that, because acceptance equals peace, by the way, if you didn't fully get that. When conflict does come up, right? When you have peace with it, when it does come up, the discomfort of it is not exacerbated and you have more capacity and cool, right? You keep cool. So you're more capable of navigating it and to like more capacity to be in your heart and your rational mind instead of taken over by your reactive lizard brain and your fight, flight, or freeze, right? So your conflicts are actually likely to be more what we'd call a difficult conversation, not so much a conflict, right? A problem-solving conversation rather than a big problematic and damaging conflict. Yeah? And again, I talked about this on the conflict proofing your marriage episode, but I want to really reiterate because it's so important and it's a message that it can be hard to internalize. So I'm just going to keep saying it. I've probably said it multiple times on the podcast, but conflict is not inherently bad or problematic for your marriage. It can be conducive to a good marriage. It can actually help you solve things. It can take your marriage forward. It can help you evolve as a couple. It can secure your marriage. It can make you more deeply connected. It can get you knowing each other better and how to work with each other better, right? It can solve things for you. I will say it again, but conflict in my marriage actually always, without exception, brings my husband and I closer. Now, to be able to get there, it can really seriously help to have some conflict skills, right? To have some good communication skills, to have some skills to kind of make conflict into more quote unquote difficult conversations, right? So it's just not like the classic, like super reactive, like kind of couple going to war with each other, which is very common, right? So it's not just like two nervous systems attacking each other, which is oftentimes what conflict or what we might call arguments are. And of course, this is a part of the work that I do with my clients. If this is something that's coming up for them, we always work on conflict. And I have a whole booklet that I give my clients in Treasured about resolving conflict and navigating conflict in a really effective way. So the skill of navigating conflict gracefully is really important. But I do want to say part of that is having more comfort with conflict, not being averse to it. It starts with that. So let's take a look at some solutions to conflict aversion. I want to give you 5 things today that are going to help you not feel so super triggered in conflict, not be so afraid of conflict, not be so avoidant of conflict, and ultimately just feel more confident and peaceful when conflict does come up in your relationship, or that will actually allow you to bring up some topics that are important for you to bring up, that you've been avoiding bringing up for fear of conflict. So the first sort of solution is to understand, for you to understand that life, human life, natural, healthy, well-adjusted human life is 50-50. 50% positive, 50% negative. And actually, my spin on this that I actually believe is more true is we have about a third of our time that's like we don't feel good. We're not feeling positive emotions, right? We're feeling negative emotions. And then we have a third of our time where we do feel positive emotions. And then we have a third of our time where it's kind of neutral, right? That there's this like spectrum of sort of neutral emotions, which isn't like totally numbness or anything. It's just like, yep, just going along, not happy, not sad, right? Not angry, not excited. When you can really get this, that a third to 50% of the time it's normal and healthy to feel negative emotions, meaning nothing has gone wrong. It doesn't mean anything is bad or wrong with your life or your marriage, right? Then this can really help us have more peace in those times of negative emotion. It can really soften those harder times. And conflict fits into that third to 50% negative, right? We could just say, yep, it's an uncomfortable experience. It fits into that 50% negative. I'm sorry, I'm going back and forth between a third and 50, just because, like, let's just say it's somewhere in there. There's not an exact, it's not exact, right? But when that happens, it's kind of like, oh yeah, like when anything that has us feeling a negative emotion, it's like, oh yeah, here's that part of life again. This is a normal part of being human. Yeah? This is a normal emotion that I experience in relationship. And what I mean by this is like any of those emotions that might come up in you during conflict, like regular emotions, when you're feeling kind of angry at your partner, or you're feeling misunderstood, or just like, I think of it as hardened against him, or that he's not caring for you or respecting you, right? These things, like when you're having these experiences, you can recognize that there's nothing wrong. It's not wrong that these are happening, that you're having this experience. Now, I do have a caveat here, which is that if these emotions, if these quote unquote negative emotions are happening, 90% of the time, that's a red flag, right? But like if you're in your life, negative emotions come up a third of the time to 50% of the time, you're a normal human. And yes, the next solution, the next tip I'm going to offer is going to help you have more peace with them. But just knowing that nothing's gone wrong, if that's your experience, can really help soften the experience of conflict and bring you more peace and ease and comfort with conflict. All right, so the next solution, the next tip to feel more comfortable with conflict, to not be so averse to it, is to learn how to feel. Not to think your feelings, which is what most of us do by default. We get caught in our head and think our feelings. But actually to feel in an embodied way, to be in your body and experience the feelings you are having, because that's where they live. They live in your beautiful, amazing body. And as you learn how to be with them in your body in a way that feels safe, which is a skill you develop by actually experiencing and being with and feeling those feelings on purpose, the feelings will stop feeling so scary, so incapacitating, so terrible. In other words, learning to feel safely, learning to have more safety with your feelings leads to feeling safe more in your life. And with those hard emotions, right? So you develop, as you learn how to feel your feelings, in other words, you develop a sense of comfort, more safety, more ease with any hard feeling. And that dissolves a lot, if not all, fear of conflict, because you're safe to feel any of the feelings that come up in conflict, that they're not a problem, that you can totally handle it, and you feel so confident about that. It feels uncomfortable, but it doesn't feel terrible or freaky or disturbing. So this is a skill I help my clients develop really deeply. It's maybe there's like 2 top skills to develop in life that'll make relationships and your whole life so much better. And this is one of them. So when I work with people in Treasured, we dive deep into how to feel, learning to feel, and developing safety to feel. But in a nutshell, it's allowing yourself to be with the experience of the sensations that the emotion, the hard emotion that you're having, creates in your body, and not jumping up into your head about it, staying in the body and letting it be there for as long as it needs to, by keeping your like kind attention on it. All right, third solution to conflict aversion is, and this is a biggie, learn to question your thoughts about it. This is about your mindset, right? Your mindset about it is what makes it so hard. Like if you're conflict averse, it's because of how you think about conflict, what you believe about conflict. And if for you, it's like, yeah, I kind of get that conflict's not so terrible. Like I intellectually get that, but your body doesn't agree, right? When like there's the slightest hint of conflict, you already feel taken over with fear and big emotions. It's probably because you've had past experiences that were bad with conflict, right? So there's a part of you, it's like a deeper subconscious part of you that believes conflict is bad, has a bad body set about it, but I still consider that mindset. It's more like how I've talked before about those beliefs in the basement, right? It's a belief that you've held on to, you've developed somewhere in your past, and it's like stored away deep down in your basement, your subconscious, right? And it has you and your nervous system reacting pretty intensely when there's conflict or when there's a hint of conflict, right? So this was really true for me. I used to have a belief based on my past that conflict led to terrible things. I got the message early in my life. There was a lot of arguing in conflict in like the first 12 years of my life in my family, one side of my family in particular. And there were nights I had to put a pillow over my head to not hear the shouting. And there were multiple divorces in my life, my family, my parents' lives. And that experience for me was a lot like the world that I knew fell apart because of conflict, right? That's how I saw it as a child, not really understanding much. So there was a deep part of me that associated conflict with life falling apart. So of course, conflict was so scary. Yeah. And this is like not uncommon. This might be absolutely something similar, might be true for you, might have happened for you. Or maybe it wasn't how you were raised or your childhood, but maybe it was a relationship you had earlier in your life or multiple relationships. But I've changed what I believe about it, and you certainly can too. I know it does not lead to my life falling apart. It doesn't even lead to my marriage falling apart. And as I said earlier, I actually believe conflict brings us closer, my husband and I. And getting to that place where I believe that, and it's actually good for us in some ways, it meant starting with questioning the part of me that believed it was going to make everything fall apart, right? And so that's my key here for you, is to question your thoughts, question your beliefs, yeah, about conflict. And there might be a lot of them in you. So I'll ask you a few questions you can write down, you can answer, you can pause and answer in your head. You can come back to later. But I want you to examine what your brain is saying about conflict. Like, what is the conversation you're having inside of your head when you're in conflict? Or maybe think back to a time. What is the conversation you have with yourself about your capacity to handle conflict? I think that's really interesting. Another question like this is like, what do you make it mean? What do you make it mean if and when there's conflict? What do you interpret it to mean about you when you have conflict with your partner? Like perhaps maybe you make it mean that you're a bad partner because you let yourself fall into conflict, right? And so therefore you'd want to do everything you can to avoid it, right? That would make you scared of having conflict because of course we never want to feel like we're bad people or bad partners. But if you're having that belief about yourself, if you're having that belief about conflict, it's going to feel awful. So what do you make conflict mean about your marriage, about your partner, right? The common one is that when we have conflict, it means things are bad between us or things are going to fall apart between us. Conflict means we don't get each other. Conflict means we're not made for each other. Conflict means things are going wrong, right? These are very common things our brain likes to tell us, or our body set, our mindset, our body set, right, likes to tell us, right? And what do you make it mean about your partner, right? Like when you have conflict, what do you make it mean about him? Like maybe you make it mean he's a jerk, or like he's a bad partner because he doesn't always agree with me or doesn't always support me, right? So really, like, notice what you interpret it to mean when there's conflict, or what you would make it mean if there were conflict, right? But I guarantee, if you're conflict averse at all, a part of you makes it mean something's gone wrong. It's bad, that something's bad is happening, right? And that is the source of your aversion. And here's the cool thing, knowing that, like seeing what you think about it, what you believe about it, will help you actually question it. Like sometimes just looking, oh, my brain thinks conflict is bad, right? Or like for me, it was like my brain was telling me conflict was going to make my life fall apart, right? And just like even bringing that out into the open, like seeing that really clearly can help dissolve it, right? Once we see it, we can dissolve it. It's not always so easy. And of course this is one reason coaching is so amazing, because we work with this stuff deeply and let go of what isn't working for us and replace our beliefs with ones that really do serve and work for us in our marriage. But sometimes it's enough to just see, oh, I'm having this belief that conflict is going to lead to the demise of my marriage, right? And then we can remember all the other things that actually conflict can actually help our marriage move forward, right? So we can question that thought. We can question that belief. Is it really true that it's going to fall apart? Is it really true that it's terrible? Get to work and question it. All right, the next solution is, and this is more for as you're experiencing conflict, this is something to do over time when you start to have a conflict, or when you're in the middle of one. It's self-soothing. It's learning how to self-soothe and kind of take a reset. Part of the reason conflict is so hard and we end up fearing it so much is because we make it harder in the middle of it than it needs to be by not taking care of our nervous systems, by not helping ourselves soothe and come back to a calmer, grounded place, right? So then we create the experience where we keep having these intense conflicts. So of course we get averse to it. Makes sense? So if we can start to show ourselves that conflict doesn't have to be as big and horrible, right, as it's been for us in the past, then we'll stop fearing it as much. And one of the best ways to do that is to actually start self-soothing or start bringing yourself back to a calmer place in the middle of conflict. And I know that sounds really hard. The way that we do that is with a tool that I think no highly sensitive person should ever live without, which is the highly sensitive person timeout. This is incredibly powerful for my clients and for me and for highly sensitive women and their partners in the middle of conflict to actually take a timeout. And during that timeout is when you can support yourself to ground, to get out of the fight or flight or freeze state, and come back to the calm and connect state where you can actually come back to having a discussion, a difficult conversation instead of this blown out conflict. So instead of going into depth on that, I'm going to point you, if you're interested in really how to do that and more about it, check out a video that I made. It's over on my blog called A Tool No HSP Should Live or Love Without. I'll put the direct link to that video, that blog post, in the show notes. So definitely go check that out. It's really key. I'm giving you a lot here. I'm being generous. I want you to have this. I want you to be able to navigate conflict and feel more peace with conflict. I really do. So I'm giving this to you. Okay, so the final solution or tip that I want to offer you today about how to be more comfortable with conflict is to build a healthy mindset around your marriage. I've already been helping you build a better mindset around conflict, right? But knowing and believing that your marriage is strong and secure is going to make conflict so much easier, right? Knowing that your marriage is strong and healthy and good, even if conflict is a part of it, even when conflict is a part of it, is going to make it so that, I always say this, right? But the little conflict is like a little whitecap in a big sea of security and love. Like no big deal, right? And it will make it easier for you to navigate that conflict with so much more grace and actually reap the rewards of conflict. So this tip builds on the third one about questioning your beliefs, right? This is kind of the other end of that, which is building those beliefs that serve you. And I guess the biggest one that I want to offer here is trusting in your love for each other, right? And actually part of that might be for you if you're like, yeah, well, I don't want to just trust it. Like, I don't think it's really real. Like, that's like empty. What if there's nothing to trust, right? I think part of it's not just the mindset, but then also doing things that actually make the marriage stronger, right? Beginning to see more and more evidence that it is strong and secure and lots of love is there. So if you missed the conflict proofing your marriage episode 94, I talk about this in my first key. There's the 4 keys that I offer you in that one. That's great. Like, go back and listen to that. I kind of go more in depth on this, or it's another aspect of this. But for right now, I want you to think about how is it true that you do have resilience together, that you do have security together, that your marriage is strong? In what ways is it strong? Yeah. And if you know you're someone who tends to think, well, my marriage isn't strong at all, like I'm worried it's going to fall apart, I did create a whole episode for you. It is episode 54 of this podcast, and it is called Our Love is Fragile Syndrome and the Remedy. I highly recommend giving that one a listen. And if you really want to make your marriage the best it can be, the strongest it can be, the most secure it can be, of course, this is the depth of the work we do in Treasured. And it makes it so that you are able to navigate conflict with so much more ease and genuinely not need to have it as often, because part of feeling like your relationship isn't strong can actually exacerbate conflict, as you might know intimately. All right, so I hope all of these solutions to conflict aversion really help you. They won't unless you apply them, which is part of why coaching is so amazing, because we get to work applying some of the sort of intellectual stuff you've been learning on the podcast. We apply it on a deep level. And that's when your marriage really starts to transform, when it is a lot easier to navigate conflict because you've actually really truly developed the skills to navigate it, right? And because you have made your marriage so much stronger, so much more loving, so much more fun and light and connected, because you've really put energy into it, because you've really done the work to make it that way. This is what we do in Treasured. So you've got a couple more days, so now's the time to get those great mutual fit forms in. That's how you sign up for Treasured. I will put the direct link for the great mutual fit form and the description page for Treasured, so you can join before the doors close on Saturday at midnight PST. I can't wait to see you there. All right, my friends, be so well and a little bit less conflict averse this week and forevermore.